Breath of the Wild released to widespread critical acclaim for its innovative physics-based gameplay system, a new spin on open-world design philosophy, and absolutely incredible presentation. It's undeniably one of the most influential video games of the modern era, on the Zelda series itself, other Nintendo franchises, and even the industry as a whole. In my opinion, it deserves the praise it gets, but I also don't blame anyone for disliking it. It was a radical departure from the games that came before it, and it's impossible for something like that to resonate with everybody, before even considering the game's standalone. Despite the game's massive impact and popularity though, there's still one aspect of Breath of the Wild that I feel is underappreciated, or at least under-discussed: its narrative. I'm not sure what the general consensus is on it today, but most opinions I've seen on the story range from neutral to outright thinking it's bad or the weakest part of the game. I couldn't disagree more though. Breath of the Wild's story is one of my favorites in the Zelda series, and the goal today is to engage with it on a deeper level. I want to dissect all aspects of it, like its fragmented structure, how the game's presentation affects our perception, and of course, what it's trying to say. What are its themes and messages, and what tools does it use to communicate them? Above all else though, I'm hoping this close reading of the game will showcase why I think the story was effective, even if most other people don't seem to agree. I hope maybe that you can gain a better appreciation for it too. Now let's get into the disclaimers. First, we will be spoiling the entirety of Breath of the Wild, from the bosses we fight to the ending of the story. We won't be discussing anything about Tears of the Kingdom, by the way. I want to focus on Breath of the Wild as a standalone narrative. Second, this is mostly a literary analysis of the game, which means we'll be making interpretations, and you may disagree with some or all of what I talk about in this analysis. That's totally fine, and I don't claim my interpretation to be any more valid than anyone else's. Finally, I actually have a quick announcement. So, I love talking about video games, and I'm sure you do too, right? I've always wanted a place to discuss video games in general with other people. Just whatever I'm currently playing or thinking about, you know? And I realized that other people might feel the same way, so I figured, why not make it myself? I made a Scribble Retrospective public Discord server that's open for everyone to join and talk about video games. There'll be more information at the end of the video, but if you're already sold, there's a link in the description. Alright, we're now ready to begin. Welcome to The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. When discussing video games, a term that gets thrown around a lot is atmosphere. It's essentially how the game's world makes the player feel. Every game has an atmosphere because it's inevitable when creating a fictional world, but you tend to only see it commented on when a video game emphasizes it. For example, the Metroid series is acclaimed primarily for its atmospheres that create intense feelings of isolation and danger. On the other end of the spectrum are so-called cozy games that got their name from their atmospheres of, well, coziness. That warm, fuzzy, relaxing feeling you can find in games like Animal Crossing. To put it all in a more modern way, you could say a game's atmosphere is like its vibes. What's interesting to me is that the term atmosphere in this context is actually an established literary device. It's in the same category as tone and mood, if you remember those concepts from school. Atmosphere is the only one of the three that made it to standard video game critique vernacular, though. I bring this up because it's easy to forget that atmosphere is also an element of a game's storytelling. That means we can attribute meaning to how a game's world makes us feel. Using atmosphere as a tool to communicate ideas in the narrative is probably even more effective in a video game than any other media form, honestly. That's due to the player being able to interact with the setting itself, rather than just being shown or told it. So, why are we talking about atmosphere in video games in a video about Breath of the Wild? Well, I'd hope the answer is obvious. Breath of the Wild is clearly a game that places emphasis on its atmosphere, and that contributes heavily to its storytelling, which we'll be talking more about very soon. We can tell just how important the atmosphere is from the iconic opening shot on the Great Plateau. If you wanted your player to immediately become invested in a game's actual world without saying so much as a word, I'd say this is a pretty good way of doing so. It's visually stunning, and the contrast with our claustrophobic tutorial chamber communicates the vastness of the setting, all the while also making us wonder about what else is out there. That's a pretty useful feeling for the player to have when the gameplay loop of the adventure is primarily about exploring the world. If the player doesn't connect with the world of Breath of the Wild, then they probably won't have fun playing it. That being said, something is missing from this opening shot. Where's everybody else? There's no birds flying overhead, no bokoblins relaxing by a campfire, no Koroks gliding in the wind, nothing. The closest thing is the old man at the very end, but we learn later that he's the ghost of the King of Hyrule, meaning he's not even technically alive. What could be the reason for this? Hyrule may be a wasteland, but it's by no means an abandoned one. There's still settlements and plenty of wildlife, but none of that is included in our first impression of the game's world. I would argue this is a conscious decision, because it helps instill a question in the player that's basically the driver of the entire story. What happened to Hyrule? This pretty cleverly puts the player into the same position as Link right away. He woke up with no memory of the events that transpired, and it's not like a first-time player will know either. Even after we learn the basics from the King and Impa a bit later on, so many details are left a mystery. We learn that Calamity Ganon is what ravaged the kingdom, but how did he win? How could Link have possibly lost? That's not what The Legend of Zelda is all about. The legend has always been Link and Zelda defeating Ganon, but at least to the best of my knowledge, this is the first time in the series when Link was explicitly defeated. By defeated, I mean Link truly failed to stop the villain from achieving their evil plan. In Ocarina of Time, Link is sealed away for 7 years when Hyrule falls, so that doesn't count. There's the downfall timeline also from Ocarina, I guess, but that kind of seems more like a retroactive canonization than one that's shown in the actual game. I don't necessarily doubt the Zelda timeline, but I don't think it's that serious outside of the games that heavily rely on previous entries' events. My main point is that Link losing is a very unexpected outcome with full series context, which contributes to the strength of the player's questions about Hyrule's fate. Getting back on track, the game frames its opening sequence in such a way to make us wonder about what happened. That means the game's atmosphere is encouraging us to feel a sense of wonder about the game's setting. If we're already wondering about the setting, then we'll naturally also start wondering about what's out there in the world. Wonder is probably the most important emotion for the player to feel in an open-world game in general. Exploration is the majority of the gameplay loop, and it becomes way more effective if we continually wonder about what we might find. I'm making a distinction between the emotions of wonder and curiosity, by the way. They're similar, but wonder captures a more mystical feeling sensation. If we were only curious about the world, then we might still enjoy our time exploring, but we would probably have reactions like, "That's neat," instead of, "Wow, that's amazing." Obviously, not everyone will actually react with wonder since the experience is subjective, but I'd argue it's what the game is going for, at least. If you loved the game, it was probably successful at making you wonder. That's all well and good, but as I already alluded, it's not super specific to Breath of the Wild. It is, however, an important piece for building the game's unique atmosphere. The next part comes from the game's general presentation and music. This might come as a shock, but these are also elements of a game's storytelling, even if we don't usually think about them that way. What characters or environments or anything at all look like affects how we perceive them, and you could write a full thesis on the importance of music for emotionally setting a scene. So, what does Breath of the Wild look and sound like? In terms of visuals, as a whole, it's a very colorful and vibrant game. It's got a pleasing, smooth, cel-shaded aesthetic. When it's sunny, the world looks bright and cheery. Even when it's night, the game is still relatively well lit. It's all just kind of nice, I think is the best way I can put it. Hyrule, for the most part, is beautiful. I wouldn't mind paying it a visit, at least. There are some truly dangerous and rough parts of the world, like Hyrule Castle, but this contrast just makes the general feeling of the world more pronounced. We know the world is nice because we've seen what the world looks like when it's not nice. Now, how about the sounds? Most of the music we hear in Breath of the Wild is very subdued. It's intended for ambience as we go on our solitary journey of adventure and discovery. I'm not particularly good at describing music in a thoughtful way, but I can tell you how it makes me feel. Relaxed. It's chill. It doesn't get in the way of any gameplay. The only song that I can think of that's super in-your-face is the Guardian Encounter theme, but Guardians are supposed to be massive disruptions for you to figure out how to resolve. If you look up Breath of the Wild music on YouTube, the most popular results are specifically ones for relaxation. Okay, so what's the point? Well, let's combine everything we've talked about so far. Breath of the Wild is a game heavily focused on its atmosphere. It encourages us to wonder above basic curiosity. The atmosphere it creates is one of relaxation, of calmness, of pleasing colors, of soothing music. The game aims to be this magical land filled with joy and wonder for us to explore. There's just one tiny little detail about all this that stands out. It's nothing really. It's just, I can't help but notice that this very setting we've been describing is a post-apocalyptic one still in imminent danger. Isn't that interesting? Why are we encouraged to feel so positively about a destroyed world on the brink of further annihilation? Maybe you could argue the world is only partially destroyed since Zelda and Ganon have been in a sort of stalemate for 100 years, but come on. The majority of what we explore is ruins. There's only a handful of towns, and some of them are still feeling the impact of Calamity Ganon to this day. You could even think of other games like Elden Ring, which also feature similarly destroyed settings. I don't know about you, but relaxing is not an adjective I would use to describe Elden Ring. This isn't a video about Elden Ring though, so I'll leave thematic interpretations of Elden Ring's atmosphere as an exercise to the viewer. Then there's all the dissonance between taking our time and how time-sensitive the main quest is. The conflict in the game comes from Calamity Ganon threatening to escape its temporary bindings at any moment. Zelda's power is weak and can't hold on much longer. Guardians and the Divine Beasts are still rampaging, even if they're limited in scope without Ganon's true control. The King of Hyrule makes clear that the kingdom is in real danger and our quest is an urgent one. We are told that it's probably not wise to go directly to Hyrule Castle and should instead free the Divine Beasts first, but all the main story quest givers, including Zelda herself, emphasize how important and time-sensitive our mission is. And yet, the atmosphere of the game is a relaxing one. We're encouraged to stop and smell the roses, so to speak. You could argue this is just one of those video game story quirks. It's not unique to Breath of the Wild. Countless games do this thing where they raise the stakes of the story, but still give the player flexibility to take it on at their own pace. Sometimes you just have to lose some realism for the sake of a better gameplay experience. Don't get me wrong, I agree completely with this. It's just a side effect of being an interactive medium. But what if it were intentional? What if this dissonance served a narrative purpose? If it did, can we make a thematic interpretation of it? Well, in my opinion, in the case of Breath of the Wild, the answer is yes to all of those questions. To learn why, though, we'll have to use the base we've established from analyzing the atmosphere to start discussing the actual themes and messages of the story. I think you'll find they surprisingly line up pretty well with this alleged dissonance. We had to go about our analysis this way because of how critical the atmosphere is to the game's storytelling. Video games are a complex art form, to say the least. Everything works together in harmony to form a cohesive experience. For example, graphics can impact our perception of gameplay and make it feel more fun. Music can be made stronger if it's associated with a powerful moment in the story, and vice versa. You can go on, but I just felt it was important to say. If you only look at Breath of the Wild cutscenes when evaluating the story, you miss out on a lot. So, with that being said, it's probably about time to start looking at those cutscenes. Our goal is to learn why Breath of the Wild is such a relaxing game, thematically speaking, and we need to look at the plot to see what themes get brought up and are explored. Luckily, I don't think we have to do much extra work to figure out the general subjects the game's story touches on. Breath of the Wild is fundamentally a game about rebuilding. I don't mean that in the sense of recreating something exactly or demolishing something to reconstruct it, but rather rebuilding in the sense of coming back from disaster. Regrouping or resurging are some other related terms for this concept. Rebuilding being a prevalent idea isn't even a secret. We want to seal away Calamity Ganon once and for all so that Hyrule has a chance to be restored to its former glory. Obviously, it won't ever be the same as it was 100 years ago, but the goal is to restore Hyrule as a kingdom entirely. This concept can be found everywhere in the game. For instance, there's a lengthy side quest to build Terrytown, one of the earliest attempts at revitalizing Hyrule. Link himself is even being rebuilt throughout the game. Like Hyrule, he was gravely injured, but quick intervention and magic healing technology gave him a second chance in the future at the cost of his physical abilities and memories. All the heart containers and stamina vessels we get are just unlocking the strength Link had in the past that was lost in his slumber. Link's lost memories are where the meat of the story takes place. We get to see the relationship develop between Link and Zelda, see some interactions with the four champions, and we eventually even see the moment of Link's defeat. The memories can be obtained in any order except for the very last one, which means everyone is going to have a different experience with learning the story. I highly doubt anyone naturally gets all the memories in chronological order, but the story is told in such a way that the order of events hardly affects their impact. There's no critical reveals that could spoil earlier moments because we already know the end result is Calamity Ganon wins. Instead, each memory adds new context to the greater picture of what happened 100 years ago. That increases our understanding no matter the order we learn the events. I really like this approach for storytelling in an open world game, and it's also particularly effective for Breath of the Wild's goal to instill us with wonder. Watching a story out of order is probably going to result in more questions than it typically would, which could lead to confusion if done poorly, but if done well, then it's going to at least make us curious, but perhaps also wondrous. So, what actually happens in these memories? Don't worry, I'm not going to waste your time by just repeating everything that happens in them exactly, but I will briefly summarize the key takeaways we'll be working with. We learn the kingdom was aware of Calamity Ganon's potential return and was making active preparations for it, following in the footsteps of their ancestors 10,000 years ago. Link was chosen by the Master Sword and became Princess Zelda's appointed knight. Zelda's role is to learn the sealing magic from the goddess as her ancestor once did, but since her mother passed away, she has no teacher. All her attempts at reaching the goddess fail, and she becomes very resentful toward her situation and herself in general. For one, Zelda's personal interests lie more in archaeology and science. She loves learning more about the world, especially ancient Sheikah technology, and wants to help research how the tech can be used against Ganon. But her father is very demanding that she focus all her attention on her divine connection. Zelda already views herself as a failure, and the pressure from her father just compounds it. I'm sure I'm not the first to point this out since the game does everything but outright tell it to you, but the Silent Princess flower is a symbol of Zelda's situation. It thrives out in the wild, but not domestically, which mirrors how Zelda's strengths are in field research instead of her princess duties. Link's proximity to her, that she never asked for by the way, doesn't help either. From Zelda's perspective, Link is a reminder of her own failures. Link's divine connection to the Master Sword appeared effortless, but Zelda just can't figure it out, no matter how hard she tries. She's quite bitter and cold to Link initially, but eventually she warms up to him after Link saves her from the Yiga clan. It's pretty endearing, but it's also a little cliché. That's not inherently a bad thing, clichés are popular for a reason. I just mean that you've probably seen a relationship blossom in this way before. Regardless, their dynamic is sweet and one of the story's highlights. Alright, so what themes get brought up in these memories? There's obviously some commentary on parental pressure and societal expectations. The king is portrayed pretty negatively in his scene with Zelda, especially if you consider that this memory is likely one of, if not the last one you get. It's in Hyrule Castle itself, the most dangerous location in the game. At this point, the player has probably learned at least a decent amount of Zelda's story, so they likely will have some extra sympathy for her. I don't think this is something the game emphasizes much though. It's certainly present, but secondary to what I've already claimed is the most prominent theme: rebuilding after everything went wrong. The Calamity isn't the only disaster shown to us in Breath of the Wild. We've actually already mentioned the other one, although it's just a little different in scale and scope. I'm talking about Zelda's failure to reach the goddess. Let me explain. Has there ever been a time in your life when you really needed to do something, but you just couldn't get it done? Maybe you got writer's block in the middle of an exam essay question and started panicking. Maybe the thought of preparing for a job interview made you freeze up and you never got anything done. Maybe it's as simple as knowing you have to wake up early in the morning, and despite laying in bed with your eyes closed for an hour, you're no closer to falling asleep. Nobody wants to do any of those things, but sometimes having to do things we don't want is the reality of the world we live in. Those three were just examples, but I'm sure you can think of more that are or have been applicable to your life in recent years. It's exactly what Zelda is going through. Her struggles aren't just the typical story of a princess who doesn't like the royal life and wants the freedom of the outside world. She really does have to speak to the goddess. No one else can do it. Calamity Ganon is a real threat that Zelda and everyone else is aware of, it's not in their heads. To that end, I don't think the King of Hyrule's concerns are unfounded, but I do think the way he acts toward Zelda is unreasonable. Think once again about one of those times when you had to get something done but couldn't. Do you think it would have been helpful to have an authority figure in your life scold you for not being able to make progress, even though you were already well aware of how important your task was? Do you think that's the key to alleviating the pressure? I don't think so. The king is just making it worse for Zelda. It's terrible for her, but there's a silver lining, because we can gain a lot of insight from this whole situation and apply it to our own lives. We're shown how all this pressure deeply affects Zelda. She resents herself and her allies, and while the game doesn't ever explicitly tell us this, my interpretation is that these built-up feelings of the weight of the world being on her shoulders and feeling like she's crumbling from the weight are also harming her ability to reach the goddess. A self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will. One more time, think about these situations in real life. One of the worst things you can possibly do if you're struggling to fall asleep is look at the clock and see just how badly you're struggling. That increases the pressure, which is what was causing the insomnia in the first place. While we aren't shown Zelda's final attempt at divine communication on Mount Lanayru, we can make a pretty good guess on what happened based on the events before and after. We see the conversation Zelda has with Link prior to the trip, where Zelda seems particularly hopeful that this one will be the one. If we're already a Zelda fan and we've learned that Mount Lanayru is connected to wisdom, something historically associated with Zelda herself, we would also suspect this is her best chance at hearing the goddess's voice. In the aftermath, Zelda is extremely quiet, apologetic, and avoids eye contact with her friends. She's clearly embarrassed and looks like she's feeling more like a failure than she ever has. My guess is when Zelda started praying at Mount Lanayru and nothing happened in the first couple of minutes, she started panicking. This was supposed to be her best chance, after all. The sacred spring with 17 years of build-up for her. If this wasn't going to work, then what possibly could? Then she may have started focusing more on her own failure than trying to talk to the goddess. Focusing on her inability takes away from her ability to concentrate on what matters. This spirals and compounds until she eventually gives up. Once again, this scene I'm describing is not shown in the game, so it's an interpretation, but based on her established expectations, I think this is consistent with what might have happened to cause the reaction she has afterward. So, what's the alternative? How can we help ourselves when we're in a situation like Zelda's? Well, ideally we'd never be in a situation when that thing we really don't want to do is an anti-apocalypse measure, but you know what I mean. The answer to this question probably isn't going to be found in the memories, since we know the heroes lost the battle. Let's remind ourselves of the work we've already done in the present, then. We established that Breath of the Wild's atmosphere is all about relaxation, which is contradictory toward the urgency of the quest and the setting itself. At the end of Breath of the Wild, the heroes are successful. Something must have changed here to make victory possible, and if we can identify that, then that's our answer. Well, what if the contradiction is the answer? What if Breath of the Wild is trying to tell us that when we're in the face of imminent disaster, when everything has gone wrong and when the pressure is building on ourselves, to just chill out a bit, take some deep breaths, calm ourselves, get ourselves into a better position so we can more accurately evaluate what needs to be done, allowing ourselves time to relax so we don't become our own worst enemy. That's why the atmosphere is so relaxing for a post-apocalyptic world. It's supposed to help foster our own mindset surrounding these intense, pressure-inducing circumstances. The memories show us the consequences if we don't take this mellow approach. Breath of the Wild lets us do everything at our own pace. We can go challenge Calamity Ganon right after getting the paraglider if we really want to. If we're genuinely skilled enough, we can even win the fight, but obviously it's not balanced around our starting stats. If we're not prepared enough, though, we can just go and do something else with no consequence. There's even a loading screen tip encouraging this behavior of not throwing ourselves at enemies to no avail, and instead taking a step back to prepare. If we were to keep throwing ourselves at enemies, in a way, it'd be like what the king was having Zelda do. He was forcing her to be single-minded in her task. The king of 100 years ago would probably have demanded Link go straight to Hyrule Castle, rather than encouraging him to visit Kakariko first. This idea of taking a second to recompose yourself is even a core gameplay mechanic. If we take a beating from enemies and find ourselves low on health, we probably want to heal ourselves. To do that, we literally pause the game. When one of our weapons breaks and we're left vulnerable, once again, we pause to equip a new one. Whether this gameplay system is well balanced is an entirely different question, by the way. I'm just arguing that it's thematically cohesive with the messages of the story. That's more applicable to immediate problems, but what about ones that are a ways away but have rapidly approaching deadlines? This is more accurate to Zelda's struggle in the past. I don't think the answer changes that much, though. Consider how Zelda is happiest in the game when she gets to help in the field with the ancient Sheikah technology. It's both interesting to her and still practical for the overall cause. Maybe this is just me, but when I have a list of tasks that need to get done, I tend to start with the one that seems least bad. My most productive days are when I have a really big task I don't want to do, so I end up doing everything else I have to do first. I remember in school especially, if there was some assignment I was dreading, I would do all my other assignments without complaint because they were at least not the big one. By the time I finished all the smaller tasks, I'd have built up productive momentum. In other words, I'd be more willing to continue working since I've already started. The Sheikah technology research is also important to Hyrule's defense and development, and even the king acknowledges that. It may not be as important as Zelda's connection with the goddess, but it was still something that had to be done. Clearly, progress was not going to happen with Zelda's mission anytime soon. There was some sort of mental block, likely caused by all the pressure around her to get it done, so why waste time having her beat her head against the wall? The king should have let her help in other ways first. When Zelda finally reaches the goddess in the final memory, it's already too late for Hyrule. In an ironic twist of fate, that causes the pressure of success to fade. Zelda no longer worries about failing her father or the kingdom as a whole because she already has, so she can instead focus wholeheartedly on protecting Link. This is what establishes the divine connection, allowing Zelda to enter the stalemate with Ganon. I would also like to point out that Link's defeat doesn't seem like it had any single cause. We never see the attack that gravely injures him. My interpretation of the final memory is that Link's body just gave out from all the struggles he endured. Link as a character doesn't get a ton of focus in Breath of the Wild, but there's a cool bit of lore we can find from Zelda's diary in Hyrule Castle. Link talks to her off-screen and tells her the reason why he's so quiet all the time is that it's a learned mindset, so he can take on all the burdens of others without complaint. Link never gave himself breaks either, and we see the consequences of that. At its core, the message of Breath of the Wild is to take some time to stop and smell the roses. Explore other ideas, do something you enjoy, or get smaller tasks done, even if just for a little while. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. I'm of course aware that not everyone is afforded opportunities to truly relax. I'm just saying that nobody can give it their absolute all 24/7. We need mental breaks, even if they only last for a moment. If you're hopelessly staring at a blank page on an exam, take 30 seconds to ground yourself. It's not like you were going to get anything done anyway in that time period, right? We shouldn't be punishing ourselves for failing to do something. We need to help ourselves so we can eventually succeed. On that note, I would like to briefly peel the curtain back a little bit. This is actually a lesson I've had to learn in my personal life, and I think my circumstances could be relatable for a lot of people, so I'd like to share it in case it helps. I've always been a massive procrastinator, but I was still able to produce good results on time. I knew procrastinating was dangerous if I had a deadline, so I'd feel guilty about doing it. The problem is the guilt wasn't a good motivator to stop procrastinating, similar to how the king's words to Zelda had the opposite effect on her. As a result, I'd occasionally get into this weird haze where I wasn't being productive, nor was I doing anything I actually enjoyed. I'd just be laying in bed and doom-scrolling on my phone or something. I was basically punishing myself for procrastinating while not doing anything to fix the issue. I don't think this fully lines up with Breath of the Wild situation, but there's a lot of similarities with what we see with Zelda. Too much pressure to get something done is just harmful. In that case, we shouldn't punish ourselves for not spending every waking moment working on something, provided we do genuinely make our best effort to succeed eventually. Too much stress helps nobody, so we shouldn't feel guilty for taking breaks. Those breaks are what give us the energy to handle these situations. Breath of the Wild even has this idea too, with all the optional content in the game making us stronger. Unfortunately, we don't live in a society where everyone can take as many healthy breaks as they'd like, so I'll again emphasize this concept varies greatly in scale from person to person. It all depends on the situation. Sometimes we have no choice but to lock in or fail, but I think even then it's okay to spend just a tiny bit of time to take some deep breaths and rebuild. I wonder then if the title of the game, Breath of the Wild, has some extra meaning. In a way, you could say that the wild represents the outside from whatever circumstances we're currently in. Taking a breath of that wild would mean to take a break, allowing ourselves a moment of reprieve with what we actually enjoy doing. That even lines up nicely with Zelda and the Silent Princess symbolism. I have absolutely no idea if this was intentional, but even if not, I think it's a cool coincidence. Speaking of which, it is interesting how Calamity Ganon is referred to as an it in the game. If we're a longtime Legend of Zelda fan, then we know Ganon is an offshoot of the actual person Ganondorf, but the game treats the Calamity as a force of nature. While it could and probably is just a representation of how, at the time of Breath of the Wild's canon at least, Ganon transformed himself into an eldritch incarnation of evil for the sake of more power, it does something else too. It generalizes the looming problem facing the Kingdom of Hyrule, Zelda, and everyone else. It's a lot easier for us to relate to the story with our own circumstances if the threat is an it. An assignment deadline is an it. A job interview is an it. Waking up on time is an it. Whatever you want to call it, people are generally dealing with its, not an actual person, when we're talking about situations like Zelda's. I'm well aware this is stretching things a bit, but I don't know, I think it fits pretty well. I have just one more thing to add. It doesn't super connect to anything really, so I'm just kind of throwing it in at the end, but all the themes present in Breath of the Wild are actually pretty appropriate for a reboot of a beloved series. It throws away a lot of what the Zelda games were known for, most notably complex dungeons and item acquisition-based progression. I know for a fact a lot of Zelda fans were apprehensive to this whole idea, but I would hope that they at least gave it a chance on its own merits. I said at the beginning that I don't blame anyone at all for disliking the change of direction, but I would hope some of that crowd was able to take a breather and reevaluate their next steps in navigating this catastrophe of a rebooted franchise. Maybe you're one of them. I don't know, it's nothing that deep. I just like both Zelda game styles a lot, and it'd be nice for them to coexist. Alright, it's time to wrap things up. What have we learned today? Video games are unique as a storytelling medium, all things considered. There are so many moving pieces in a game that all work in harmony, and a lot of games, like Breath of the Wild, place meaning in those aspects that aren't typically thought of as part of the story. The atmosphere is a relaxing one that encourages us to feel wonder about a dangerous world, and that dissonance was key to figuring out what the story really means. We need to do our best to avoid panicking and compounding pressure on ourselves. When things aren't going well or have already gone horribly wrong, we should step back for a moment, take a deep breath, regroup, and reevaluate. Sometimes that's all we really need to overcome challenges. Don't underestimate how important it is to refuel and do things for your own sake when you have the chance. If you don't normally have the chance, start as small as you reasonably can. It really helps. As I mentioned at the beginning, Breath of the Wild is a game famous for many reasons, but its story isn't typically listed as one of them. Regardless of how you feel about its storytelling methods or whether you connected with the characters or anything like that, I'm hoping I was able to demonstrate why there is a reason to like it a lot. I'm not here to argue the story is actually secretly extremely deep and philosophical, but its themes and messages are genuinely really important. Maybe my personal experience affects how I interpret the story, but that's true for everyone, right? It should be, at least. Try thinking deeply about the video games you play, if you don't already. It's pretty fun. We have now finally reached the end. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please do make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe so I can make more videos like these. It really helps out a lot. If you especially enjoyed the video and would like to support me directly, you can also consider becoming a channel member. Before we get to the things that I wanted to mention that didn't quite fit anywhere in the script, I want to elaborate on the Discord server. It's completely open to everyone. You don't need to be a channel member or anything. The idea is to just have a space to talk about random video games with like-minded people. I've had this kind of thing with friends on a smaller scale, but I think it'd be cool to try to build a real community for it. Post your game reviews, rankings, tier lists, story discussions, recommendations, look for groups to play niche multiplayer games, anything. If this kicks off, then in the future I'm hoping to do things like a server-wide Game Awards vote at the end of the year, or maybe even have a video game play-along group, like a book club but for video games. The server is meant for people that really like video games in general, so if this sounds fun, feel free to join with the link in the description. Okay, back to Breath of the Wild and the couple of things I wanted to mention. First, the physics system of the game might genuinely be the best part about it. Everything just works like you'd expect it to, and the sequel is even better in that regard. I especially like how you can use the environment around you to help you fight enemies. I love the combat system too, and if I have one complaint about the game, it's that there's not a ton of enemy variety to take advantage of its systems. Tears of the Kingdom improves on that a lot too, but I just want to commend Breath of the Wild for coming up with it all in the first place. Second is actually a question for you. How often, if at all, did you ride a horse in the game? I've always wondered if I'm the odd one out, but I hate riding horses in Breath of the Wild specifically. It's got nothing to do with the actual riding mechanics, those are fine, but it just feels way more restrictive to me. I don't want to have to bother managing my horse's safety or remember where it is if I want to start climbing a mountain or something. I also appreciate the atmosphere of the game more if I'm just by myself without a companion. I don't know if this makes me weird or if it's a common experience, but I'm genuinely curious, so let me know. Alright, that's it for real. Thank you once again for watching, and see you next time.